Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the Database Guy, and what we're going to do today is we're going to do another video on Mongo database, MongoDB, and what it is we're going to do is that we're going to set up our database server both on Linux and Windows for real authentication. And what I mean by that is that you have to have a user ID, you have to have a password, and it won't let you see anything without that user ID and password. Now we're going to do this in Linux first because that's the server of choice, but then we're going to also do it in Windows. I'm not going to do it in Mac because it's very much like the Windows or the Linux version because Mac OS is a Unix operating system. So if I get enough people ask me to do it on Mac, I'll do it on Mac as well. But I think those of you that are messing around with MongoDB, you're pretty sophisticated. You should be able to figure out how to do it on Mac. And I'm trying to get as many videos done as I can for you guys. So let's do it on Linux first and then Windows. Let's go. So I've got my Linux up here and running. And what I want to do is I want to show you what authentication actually means. I'm just going to log in I'm not even going to log in. I'm just going to type MongoSH. And it let me in. Now that doesn't mean I have access to anything, but let's go ahead and see if I have access to anything. I'm going to say show DBs, and I have access to where I can see the databases. I'm going to try to use the administrator's database because that has user IDs in it. Well, holy Moses, it looks like it's letting me in. So let's try to display them. It actually let me go in and display secure stuff. This is the user ID, my root admin user ID that I set up. Now, if you don't have this set up yet, go ahead and take a look at my previous video on setting up MongoDB, installing it on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and get it all set up. But this is not authentication. There's just no way. Now I did set up a user ID called root admin, and let me log in and see if there's anything different there. So I'm going to say MongoSH --host localhost -u root admin -p, and then authentication admin. So this is really the way you should log in. And I'll type my password. Okay, let's do show DBs. Well, it's showing me the same thing. Well, I don't see a difference. So, even though I have a root admin ID, even though I say I'm authenticating, it isn't really doing anything. It's making sure that my user ID and password are there. But if I don't have a user ID and password, it doesn't care. It lets me in anyway. That's horrible authentication. So we have to do a couple of things here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the server to authenticate correctly. Then we're going to set up the firewall to allow people to dial in or to connect into your server from the outside. And we're going to have to make some configuration changes there as well. So let's go ahead and do both of those. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the mongod.config file, and I find that in the etc directory, and we can see it right there. So I'm going to sudo, now I'm going to do it as a super user, and I want to come down here to security, and I want to uncomment, or is it decomment? I can't remember. So I want to uncomment that, and I want to, I don't want to use tab. You do not want to use tab on this file. MongoDB is very, very persnickety about stuff like that. So what I want to do is I want to put in a new entry here called authorization, double quote enabled, and type it in just like that, otherwise you're liable to have an issue. Okay? And that's really all you have to do. Now, it's going to require user ID and password to be authorized whenever you log in. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, I could have done that with Nano. If you don't like Vim, I could have done that with Nano. I could have even done it with Genie or whatever is your favorite Linux editor. You know, just as long as you do it as a sudo, as a super user, no problem. All right. So now, after we make that change, we now have to restart the Mongo database service, and before we do that, I'm going to say sudo systemctl status mongod, and that shows me that the Mongo database service is running. Looks good. Let's go ahead and restart it. And the way that you restart it is you just say restart. Pretty easy. Now after you restart it, you want to check it again to make sure we didn't have an error in the configuration file. Now the first time I recorded this, I had a technical issue, so I have to re-record. But the first time I recorded this, I actually, instead of saying authorization, was it authorization? What did I type in? Yeah, instead of authorization, I said validation or something like that. So it didn't start up. We got an error right here. And it said inactive, and so I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? And I looked at my notes and I went, oh, I've got to say authorization. So that's why it's so important to look at this. Okay, so now let's see what happens when I log in. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to log in as Mongo SH with no authentication, and it let me in, but I can't see anything. Oh, wait a minute, typed that in wrong. I can't see anything. It says command list databases requires authentication. So that's better. So now let's log in using my authenticated username. And I can now see it. So that is real authentication. So I am authenticated in the local host. I am not authenticated from outside of the computer. And that's what servers are all about, right? Is that you want to connect to a computer externally. So to do that, we have to set up the firewall. So let me quit out of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure, I'm going to ask what is the status of the firewall. So I'm going to say sudo ufw status. And the firewall right now is inactive, which means anybody can get in. I don't like that at all. I do not like it for anybody to get in. Now this is a VMware guest operating system. Who cares if anybody gets in? But if you're doing a real server, you want to set up the firewall. So I'm going to say sudo ufw enable. So not only will that start the firewall, but it'll also enable it, so next time the operating system boots up, it'll automatically start it. Let's do a status, and you can see that it's enabled. So now what we have to do is, now we have to set up the actual rule to allow the port for MongoDB to communicate through. So the way that you do that is you say sudo ufw allow, and the port, the default port that Mongo sets up is 27017. It says that it was added. Let's go ahead and look at status, and we can see it there. Now you can do the same thing. Let's say you want to set up your web server. Let's say you want to set up your SSH, secure shell. So you can set up as many as you want, and that will allow, the firewall will then allow those ports to go in and out of your computer. So that's it. That's all you have to do under Linux. Now, what you might have to do in your Compass, let's actually bring that up. When you log in with Compass, let's see what happens, because I actually, to be honest with you, I've never done this because I've never done everything command line. Let's see what happens after we set up authentication and I say connect. Well, it says an error while loading instance command. Oh, it requires authentication. So I actually, it looks like I have to edit this this connection. So let me see. Yeah, Compass, I'm not super impressed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill Compass. I'm going to go back up and start it up again. Okay, instead of connect, what I have to do is I have to give it a user ID and password. So to do a user ID and password, up in front of the host, I have to put a different type of connection. I have to actually specify the user ID and password. So I don't remember off the top of my head if it's root admin colon the password. That's my password. That doesn't look right to me. I think that has to go out here maybe. No, I don't think so. And all we need to do here is just put an @ sign there. And that should do it. So let's try it now. Now I could save and connect it. And in fact, I'm going to say save. And I'm going to give it a name. So let's connect. And now it let me in. So there's my employee stuff. So that is one thing that you have to remember, is that when you turn on authentication, any database front end, Compass in this case, must actually maybe log in a little bit differently. So that's Linux. Let's take a look at Windows. Okay, here on Windows, let's go ahead and see what we have to do with Windows. Now, if you watch the Linux one, this is going to be very easy for you. If you didn't watch the Linux one, I'll try to reproduce everything I did. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring up the command prompt. And let's go ahead and demonstrate how this works. I'm going to type mongo sh, which is the shell. Now notice I didn't type any user ID and password or anything. So I'm going to just say show DBs. It's letting me see the databases. I'm going to say use admin. I'm going to show collections. I'm going to say db.system.users.find. And it lets me look at everything. No authentication. And as I said in the Linux version of this video, that's really, really bad. Really, really bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of there. Now, to enable authentication, real authentication, I have to go into a folder. Now, on Linux, it was a little bit easier to find, but on Windows, it's a little more difficult. I'm going to go to Program Files, MongoDB Server 7.0 bin. And there it is. Let's go ahead and dir, and we can see it right here. Again, you can use any editor you want, but you do have to use it as an administrator. So I have to restart all this here. So I'm going to exit out of this, and I'm going to say command. And when I get to the command prompt, I have to click run as administrator. And from here, I just have to go to the same place. All right, and let's go ahead and edit that. And just as we did in Linux, we have to come down here to the security section, and I have to delete that hashtag that uncomments it. And I can't use the tab. Don't use the tab. Use like a couple of spaces and say, I believe it is authorization, double quote, enabled. And as I said in the Linux version of this video, you have to be very careful with MongoDB. It's very persnickety. You know, I just do everything this way. This works. I've seen it where you've used a tab and nothing works anymore. So just make sure you use a couple of spaces. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now what we have to do is we have to restart the service. Now on Linux, you simply type a really easy command, but on Windows, I have to go to the Services app. So I went down and searched for Services. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move down to MongoDB Server, right-click on it, and say Restart. So it stops it first, and then it starts it. It looks like it started up okay. All right, great. So now let's go ahead and log in. Now I'm going to get out of Administrator here, just so I can prove that it's not just because I'm an administrator that this works. And let's see if we can do a mongo sh. I'm going to say show DBS. Oops, doesn't let me do it. It requires authentication to look at the databases. All right, awesome. So now let's log in as an authenticated user. So I'm going to say mongo sh. You don't really need this localhost, but I do it just out of habit. Okay, and then authentication. All right, let's see. Awesome. So I have now been authenticated as a real user. And again, if you didn't watch the previous video on setting up MongoDB, you might not have that root admin. This one right here, you might not have that ID set up in your admin database. So go back and look at that previous video. There should be a link to that in this video's description, and go ahead and set that up. And Compass is the same thing. If I go into Compass, oh, it doesn't even look like I have it installed. So Compass, the connection has to be changed where you have to have, and I believe it's It is MongoDB / user ID / password @ and then the URL. So take a look at the Linux version because it shows you how of this video. It shows you how to do it, and it's pretty much the same. So there you go. So there's authentication with MongoDB. The next thing we're going to do in this series of Mongo database videos is I'm going to show you how to write your very first Python script to actually access data and even maybe create some documents in your in your MongoDB server. See you then.